The winter moon hung heavy over the Silvercrest territory, casting long shadows across the pack grounds where Alara Moonstone scrubbed blood from the training hall floors. Her knees ached against the cold stone, her hands raw and cracked from the harsh soap. But she worked in silence because silence was survival. Around her, warriors passed without a glance, their boots tracking fresh mud across the sections she had already cleaned. No one apologized. No one even noticed. To them, she was part of the scenery, as permanent and unremarkable as the stones beneath their feet. Alara had learned long ago that being invisible was a mercy in a world where being seen could get you killed. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the werewolf hierarchy, born without the strength or size that commanded respect. Her wolf was small, silver-furred and gentle, better suited to healing than hunting. In a society that valued power above all else, gentleness was weakness, and weakness was a sin. Her parents had been scholars, keepers of ancient pack histories and lunar rituals, but knowledge held no currency in the new regime. When Alpha King Kale Blackthorn seized control 5 years ago, he swept away the old traditions like dust, replacing wisdom with brutality and ceremony with conquest. Her parents disappeared during the first purge, accused of harboring loyalties to the former Alpha. Alara never learned what happened to their bodies. If you are enjoying this story of resilience and transformation, please take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments what you think about Alara's journey so far. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to life. Kale Blackthorn was everything an Alpha King should be, at least on the surface. Tall and powerfully built, with black hair and eyes like chips of obsidian, he commanded attention the moment he entered a room. His wolf was massive, a creature of shadow and fury that could crush throats with a single bite. He had unified 7 fractious packs under his banner, through a combination of strategic marriages, political assassinations, and sheer intimidating presence. The kingdom had never been more powerful, its borders secure, its enemies scattered. But power built on fear was a fragile thing, and Kale knew it. He needed scapegoats to maintain control, convenient targets to blame when things went wrong, and Alara had been his favorite victim. The first time he used her was 3 years ago, when a high treaty negotiation with the Northern Packs collapsed. Kyle had been too aggressive in his demands, too quick to threaten force, and the Northern Alpha walked away from the table. But admitting fault would have shown weakness. So instead, Kyle claimed that Alara, serving as a kitchen assistant during the feast, had poisoned the Northern delegation's food with wolfsbane. It was a ridiculous accusation. Wolfsbane would have killed them instantly, and everyone at that dinner was fine. But truth did not matter. Kale needed someone to punish, and Alara was expendable. She was dragged before the pack court, beaten publicly, and branded with the mark of traitor on her left shoulder blade. Her remaining family, an aunt and 2 younger cousins, were exiled to the borderlands where rogue attacks were common. She never saw them again. The second time was during a famine the following winter. Kale had overspent on military expansion, leaving the pack's grain stores depleted. When pack members began to starve, he blamed Alara for stealing food meant for warriors and giving it to Omega children. Another lie. She had barely enough to feed herself, but Kale paraded her through the streets, forcing her to wear a sign that read, "Thief," while pack members threw stones and rotting vegetables. One stone split her eyebrow open, leaving a thin white scar that she still carried. She learned to keep her head down after that, to make herself as small and insignificant as possible, hoping that invisibility would protect her. But Kale had not forgotten her. She was too useful, too convenient. Whenever he needed to distract from his own failures or unite the pack against a common enemy, Alara became that enemy. She was blamed for broken equipment, for spoiled meat, for bad weather during the hunt. The pack learned to hate her without knowing why, absorbing Kyle's contempt as truth. And Alara endured because she had no other choice. Running would mean death in the wild lands beyond pack territory. Staying meant suffering, but it meant survival. So she scrubbed floors and kept her mouth shut and dreamed of a world where she mattered. The moons turned and seasons changed, and Alara became a ghost in her own life. She worked in the kitchens during the day, slept in a tiny room in the servants' quarters at night, and spoke to no one. The other Omegas avoided her, afraid that her taint would spread to them. The higher-ranking wolves treated her like furniture, and Kyle, when he noticed her at all, looked at her with cold satisfaction, as if her continued existence was proof of his power. She was his creature, his tool, his victim whenever he needed one. The thought should have broken her. Instead, it kindled something dark and patient in her chest. Hatred, yes, but also determination. She would survive this. She would outlast him, and someday, somehow, she would make him pay. The first sign that something was wrong came on a frost-bitter morning in early winter. Was carrying water buckets from the well when she heard the commotion from the main hall. Raised voices, the clatter of weapons, and then a howl of pure agony that made her drop the buckets and run, despite every instinct screaming at her to stay away. She reached the hall's entrance just as a group of warriors stumbled out, supporting Kale between them. The Alpha King's face was gray, sweat pouring down his temples, and his right arm hung useless at his side, the skin covered in spreading black, veins that looked like cracks in porcelain. He was shaking, his eyes unfocused, and when he tried to speak, only a strangled gasp emerged. The pack healer, a stern elderly woman named Marta, examined him with trembling hands. Ilara watched from the doorway as Marta peeled back Kale's sleeve to reveal more of the black veining spreading up his arm toward his shoulder. The other wolves recoiled, fear sharp in the air. Marta's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. This was the shadow rot, an ancient curse that had not been seen in living memory. It consumed alpha wolves from the inside out, turning their strength against them, feeding on their power until nothing remained but a dried husk. There was no cure in any of their medical texts, no herb or remedy that could stop it. Kyle would be dead within a month. Panic swept through the pack like wildfire. Without an Alpha King, the carefully maintained alliances would crumble. The other packs would sense weakness and attack. The kingdom Kale had built would tear itself apart. Emergency councils were called. Messengers sent to every healer and wise woman in the territories. But as days passed and Kale's condition worsened, the black veins spreading across his chest and up his neck, hope faded. The strongest alpha in generations was dying, and no one could stop it. Ilara watched the chaos from her invisible corner and felt nothing. Let him die. Let him suffer as she had suffered. The world would be better without him. But the moon goddess, it seemed, had other plans. On the 7th day of Kale's decline, when the black veins had reached his jaw and his breathing came in labored gasps, an ancient wolf arrived at the pack borders. She was impossibly old, her fur white as fresh snow, her eyes milky with cataracts. She walked through the gates without challenge, the warriors too shocked by her sudden appearance to stop her. She went straight to Kale's sick room, examined him with one sniff, and then spoke in a voice like grinding stones. The shadow rot could only be cleansed by an Omega of pure bloodline, one untouched by alpha dominance, one whose connection to the moon goddess remained uncorrupted. And she knew of only one such Omega in all the territories. Ilara Moonstone. The name dropped like a stone into still water, and every eye in the room turned toward the doorway where Ilara stood. Invisible as always, the ancient wolf's milky gaze found her unerringly, and for the first time in years, Ilara felt truly seen. The old wolf nodded slowly. This one carried the old blood, the healing gift of the first Omega wolves who could speak directly to the moon. Her power had been dormant, suppressed by trauma and fear. But it was there, waiting. She could save the Alpha King if she chose. If she chose. The words hung in the air like a blade. Kale's second in command, a brutal man named Garrett, immediately ordered Ilara brought forward. She would heal the Alpha King immediately, he declared. Or she would be executed for treason. But the ancient wolf raised one paw, and Garrett fell silent. This was not a matter of orders, she said. Healing of this nature required willing participation, a gift freely given. Force would only spread the rot faster. Ilara alone could decide whether to save the man who had destroyed her life. The choice was hers. Alara stared at Kale's suffering form, at the fear in the eyes of the wolves who had tormented her for years, and felt a rush of savage satisfaction. She could walk away. She could let him die. Everything in her screamed for that vengeance, for the justice of watching her abuser face the same helplessness he had forced upon her. But as she stood there, something else stirred inside her. Not compassion, not forgiveness, but opportunity. If she held his life in her hands, she finally had power over him, and power, she had learned, was the only currency that mattered in this world. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. She would help, she said, but not for free. She wanted a public trial, where every crime Kale had committed against her and her family would be acknowledged and recorded in the pack histories. She wanted her family's names cleared of all false charges. She wanted restitution for every beating, every humiliation, every lie. And she wanted Kale to abdicate his throne, to step down as Alpha King once he was healed, and to recommend her as his successor. The demand was outrageous. Impossible. A complete inversion of the pack's power structure. The room erupted in shouting, warriors reaching for weapons, Garrett's face turning purple with rage. But Kale, barely conscious, raised one shaking hand. His voice was a rasp, barely audible, but everyone fell silent to hear it. He agreed to her terms. All of them. He would face trial, clear her family's names, pay restitution, abdicate, and support her claim to leadership. He swore it on his alpha oath, binding himself to the promise. If he broke his word after being healed, the curse would return and kill him within days. It was a binding contract, enforced by the moon goddess herself. Alara felt the weight of that oath settle into place, felt the magic recognize her claim. She had won. After years of suffering, she finally had the power to change everything. She knelt beside Kale's bed and placed her hands on his chest, over the worst of the black veining. The moment her skin touched his, something electric shot. Through her, a connection so profound it stole her breath. Power flowed from some deep well inside her, ancient and warm, pouring into Kale's corrupted body. The black veins began to recede, shrinking back from her touch like living things fleeing from light. Kale gasped, his back arching, and Alara felt the curse fighting back, trying to hold on. She pushed harder, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she possessed, and the shadow rot gave way inch by inch. But with the healing came something else, something neither of them expected. The mate bond, dormant until that moment of profound connection, snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. Alara felt it slam into her chest, a golden thread connecting her soul to Kale's, binding them together in a way that transcended anger or pain. She could feel his emotions, his shock and confusion mirroring her own. And beneath that, a crushing wave of guilt and self-loathing that nearly knocked her over. For the first time, she felt what Kale truly thought about himself. And it was not the arrogant certainty she expected. It was hatred. Deep, toxic, corrosive hatred directed at himself. If this revelation is surprising you as much as it surprised Alara, please consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss what happens next in this intense journey. These stories take time to craft, and your subscription truly makes a difference. She pulled her hands back as if burned, the healing incomplete but enough. To save his life, the black veins had retreated to just his right hand, contained but not eliminated. Kale would live, but he would carry a reminder of how close he came to death. He stared at her with wide eyes, and she knew he felt it too, the bond pulling them together like gravity. Neither of them spoke. What could they say? The universe had declared them mates. Two souls meant to complete each other, but the crimes between them were an ocean too wide to cross. Alara stood on shaking legs and walked out of the room without a word, leaving Kyle gasping behind her. The next days were chaos. Kyle recovered quickly once the shadow rot was contained, his alpha strength returning in full. True to his oath, he announced a public trial where he would answer for his crimes against Alara Moonstone. The pack was stunned, the neighboring alphas even more so. An alpha king voluntarily submitting to judgment was unheard of. Many suspected a trick, some elaborate scheme to solidify power. But Alara knew better. She felt the mate bond tugging at her constantly now, a persistent ache in her chest, and through it she felt Kale's genuine intention. He would keep his word. Whether he wanted to or not, the moon goddess would ensure it. The trial was held in the Great Hall before the entire pack and representatives from allied territories. Kyle stood alone at the center. No armor, no weapons. Just a man facing the consequences of his actions. Alara, for the first time in her life, sat in a position of honor, watching from a raised platform. One by one, Kale confessed to his crimes. The false accusation of poisoning, the invented theft, the exile of her family, every beating, every public humiliation, every lie he had spread about her. He named them all, his voice steady, but his face ashen. He explained his reasoning, how he had needed scapegoats to maintain control, how he had chosen her because she was vulnerable and expendable. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply stated the truth and accepted responsibility. The pack listened in horrified silence. Many had participated in Alara's torment, believing the lies Kale fed them. Now they faced the reality that they had tortured an innocent woman for years. Shame hung thick in the air, and several wolves wept openly. Kyle concluded by announcing his abdication, effective immediately after restitution was paid. He declared that Alara Moonstone, by right of the moon goddess's favor and her proven strength of character, would be the next leader of the Silvercrest pack. He would serve as her advisor if she wished, but the throne was hers. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs, but no one dared challenge him. The oath was binding, and everyone present felt the weight of divine will behind his words. Alara should have felt triumphant. She had everything she demanded: justice, acknowledgement, power. But all she felt was emptiness. The mate bond thrummed between them, and through it she felt Kale's emotions like they were her own. He was relieved to finally confess, exhausted by years of maintaining his iron control. And beneath it all, there was something that looked almost like hope. Hope that by facing his crimes, he might become someone different, someone better. It made her furious. He did not get to feel hope. He did not get redemption after everything he had done. She stood and addressed the assembly, her voice cold. Kale would indeed abdicate, and she would lead the pack going forward. But she would not do it alone. She established a council of omegas, betas, and lower-ranking wolves who would have equal say in pack decisions. No more absolute rule. No more scapegoats. The pack would be rebuilt on principles of shared responsibility and transparency. Any wolf found abusing those weaker than themselves would face immediate exile. The old ways of rule through fear were over. Kale had torn down the gentle traditions of her parents' generation, but she would build something new, something better. The pack would learn to thrive without terror. The changes came swiftly. Alara moved into the Alpha's residence but refused the title of Alpha Queen. She was simply leader, no more exalted than anyone else. She opened the pack's records to public viewing, exposing decades of corruption and abuse. She invited the exiled families back, including searching for any survivors of her own family. She established healing circles for wolves traumatized by the old regime, and through it all, Kale remained, keeping his word to serve as advisor, though she barely spoke to him outside official meetings. The mate bond pulled at them constantly, making his proximity both agony and strange comfort. But she refused to acknowledge it. He did not deserve her as a mate. The moon goddess had made a mistake. But the external threats did not wait for internal healing. Other alphas, sensing the power vacuum, began testing Silvercrest's borders. Raids increased, territories were contested, and rumors spread that the pack had grown weak under Omega leadership. The council was divided on how to respond. Some wanted to return to Kale's aggressive military tactics. Others advocated for pure defense. Alara found herself caught between maintaining her principles and protecting her people. And through it all, Kale watched with those dark eyes, saying nothing unless asked, but she felt his thoughts through the bond. He was waiting for her to ask for his help, his expertise, and she hated that she might need it. The crisis came to a head when the Northern Pack, the same one whose treaty Kale had bungled years ago, marched a warband to their borders. The Northern Alpha, a cruel man named Victus, demanded Silvercrest's immediate surrender and annexation. He had heard of their new Omega leader and assumed they would fold without a fight. His message was clear and insulting, calling Alara a weak pretender playing at leadership while true alphas conducted real business. He gave her 3 days to surrender before he would attack and slaughter every Omega in the pack as a lesson to others who questioned the natural order. The council erupted in panic. They could not win a direct confrontation with the Northern Pack's superior numbers. Fleeing would mean abandoning their territory and becoming wanderers. Some suggested offering Victus a tribute, buying him off, but others argued that would only invite future extortion. Alara felt the weight of every life in the pack pressing down on her shoulders. She had demanded this power, claimed this throne, and now she had to prove she could protect her people. But she was no warrior. She had no experience in military strategy. Everything she had built would crumble because she did not know how to fight. Kyle spoke for the first time in the meeting, his voice cutting through the chaos. He could negotiate with Victus, alpha to alpha. He still had enough reputation to make the Northern Pack hesitate. But his price was steep. He wanted Alara to accept the mate bond fully, to acknowledge their connection publicly and begin the bonding process. Not because he deserved it, he said, but because a united leadership would show strength. A divided pack leadership invited conquest. If Alara rejected the bond, Victus would sense the internal conflict and press his advantage. But if they presented a unified front, mates and co-leaders, the Northern Pack might reconsider. Alara felt sick. He was using her again, manipulating circumstances to get what he wanted. But even as rage boiled in her chest, she felt through the bond that he was not lying about the tactical assessment. Victus would see a rejected mate bond as weakness, proof that Silvercrest's leadership was fractured. And more than that, she felt Kale's genuine reluctance to ask. He knew he was forcing her into an impossible choice, and he hated himself for it. But he would do anything to protect the pack, even make himself more despicable in her eyes. It was the same twisted logic that had driven his cruelty as Alpha King, the belief that his own damnation was worth the pack's survival. She had 72 hours to decide. Accept the bond with the man who destroyed her life, or risk everything she had built. That night, unable to sleep, she walked in the forest under the full moon, seeking guidance from the moon goddess. The ancient wolf appeared again, stepping from the shadows as if she had been waiting. Alara demanded to know why the goddess had cursed her with this mate bond. Why tie her to her abuser? What kind of divine justice was this? The ancient wolf regarded her with those milky eyes and spoke in that grinding voice. The moon goddess did not make mistakes, but she also did not force love. The bond was an opportunity, not a prison. Kale could change if given reason to, but only Alara could decide if he deserved that chance. And Alara, in turn, could break free of her victim identity and claim her full power, but only if she stopped running from difficult truths. What difficult truths? Alara demanded. The ancient wolf tilted her head. That healing Kale had awakened something in her, a power that went beyond curing curses. She was a moon daughter, blessed with the ability to see truth and inspire transformation in others. But that power only worked if she engaged fully with the world, including the painful parts. Running from Kale, rejecting the bond, was running from herself. She could be a leader who hid from hard choices, or she could be a leader who walked through fire and emerged transformed. The choice was always hers. The ancient wolf faded back into the trees, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts. She sat under the moon until dawn, wrestling with anger and pragmatism and something she refused to name. By the time the sun rose, she had made her decision. She would accept the mate bond, but on her terms. Kale would have to prove through actions, not words, that he was capable of true change. He would submit to regular councils where any pack member could question his advice. He would work to repair the damage he caused, starting with personally apologizing to every family he had harmed. And he would never, ever hold power over her again. They would be partners only if he earned it every single day. If he failed, she would reject the bond and face whatever consequences came. But she would not let fear make her decisions anymore. She presented her terms to Kale privately, watching his face carefully. He agreed immediately. No negotiation, no argument. She felt through the bond that he expected nothing less, that he knew he deserved far worse. And beneath that, buried so deep she almost missed it, was a fragile thread of hope that maybe, somehow, he could become worthy of her. It should have softened her. Instead, it made her angry all over again. He did not get to hope. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she would use him to save her pack. And then they would see what remained. The next day, Alara and Kale stood together at the border as Victus and his warband arrived. Kale wore no crown, no symbols of his former power, but his presence was still commanding. Alara stood beside him, their shoulders touching, the mate bond visible to anyone with the senses to detect it. Victus noticed immediately, his sneer faltering. He had expected to find a weak Omega pretending at leadership, but instead, he found a mated pair, the old Alpha King standing in support of the new leader. It changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Kale spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of old authority. Victus was making a mistake. Silvercrest was not weak, merely transforming. The pack had a moon daughter as their leader now, blessed directly by the goddess, and attacking such a pack would bring divine wrath. Furthermore, Kale himself had sworn an oath to defend Alara with his life, and every wolf present knew his reputation in battle. Victus could attack if he wished, but it would cost him dearly, and even if he won, the other packs would tear apart his weakened forces before he could consolidate power. Was temporary territory worth that risk? Victus hesitated, calculating. His warband was strong, but not strong enough to fight both Silvercrest and deal with opportunistic rivals afterward. And the mention of divine blessing unsettled him. No Alpha wanted to risk offending the moon goddess. He tried to bluster, demanding concessions, but Alara stepped forward with a counter-offer. Silvercrest would open trade negotiations with the Northern Pack. They had skilled healers and craftsmen that the Northern Territories lacked. A mutual benefit arrangement was worth more than a costly war. She spoke with confidence, without fear, and Victus found himself wrong-footed. This was not the easy conquest he expected. After hours of tense negotiation, Victus agreed to withdraw in exchange for a trade agreement and a formal apology from Kale for the insult years ago. It was a better outcome than anyone expected. As the Northern Warband retreated, the Silvercrest pack erupted in celebration. They had avoided disaster through diplomacy rather than bloodshed, proving that the new way could work. Alara felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She had protected her people. She had succeeded where Kale's old methods would have led to slaughter. That night, as the pack celebrated, Kale found her on a balcony overlooking the territory. He did not speak at first, just stood beside her in the moonlight. Finally, in a voice so quiet she almost missed it, he said thank you, not just for saving his life, but for showing him what leadership could be. He had spent years believing that strength meant dominance, that caring for the weak was foolish sentiment. Watching her negotiate with Victus, protecting her people without sacrificing her principles, had shaken something loose in him. He understood now what he had destroyed when he dismantled the old traditions. And he understood that he could never repair all the damage, but he could at least stop causing more. Alara did not respond immediately. She was too aware of the mate bond humming between them, stronger now after their public show of unity. She could feel his sincerity through the connection, his genuine remorse and fragile determination to be better. Part of her wanted to accept it, to believe in redemption. But another part, the part that still bore scars from his cruelty, whispered warnings. Words were easy. Actions would prove everything. So she told him that. She acknowledged his thanks, but reminded him that he had years of actions to account for. One negotiation did not erase 3 years of torment. If he wanted her trust, her acceptance, her affection, he would have to earn it slowly, painfully, through consistent proof that he had truly changed. Kyle nodded, expecting nothing less. He asked only one thing in return: permission to begin the mate bond properly, not the forced political necessity of their public display, but the actual private rituals that would fully connect them. He wanted to court her, to learn who she was beyond the victim he had created. He promised it would be at her pace, with her consent every step of the way. If she said no, he would respect that, and they would remain political allies only. But if she gave him the chance, he would spend the rest of his life proving he could be the mate she deserved. Elara looked at him for a long moment, studying the face that had haunted her nightmares. In the moonlight, he looked different somehow, less like the monster and more like a man. A deeply flawed man who had done terrible things, but a man capable of growth. She thought of the ancient wolf's words about walking through fire and emerging transformed. This would be fire indeed, learning to love someone who had hurt her so deeply. But maybe transformation required impossible choices. Maybe healing meant facing the hardest truths. She told him yes, but with strict boundaries. They would start as acquaintances, learning each other as people. No physical contact beyond necessary public displays. No assumptions about her feelings. He would attend her healing circles and hear the stories of people he had hurt. He would work alongside Omegas in menial tasks, remembering what it meant to serve rather than rule. And most importantly, the moment she felt he was manipulating her or falling back into old patterns, she would end the courtship. Permanently. He agreed to everything, and she felt through the bond that he meant it. Whether he could actually follow through remained to be seen. The months that followed were strange and difficult. Kyle attended every healing circle, sitting silently while wolves shared their trauma stories. Several times Elara saw him leave early, his face gray, unable to hear more about the suffering his regime had caused. He worked in the kitchens where she once scrubbed floors, in the training halls, cleaning equipment. He wrote personal apology letters to every family he had exiled or harmed. And slowly, painfully, Elara watched him transform from the Alpha King into something more human. Their courtship was awkward and tentative. Kyle asked her about her childhood, her parents' work, her dreams before everything fell apart. She found herself talking about things she thought she had forgotten. Her father's gentle hands as he transcribed ancient texts, her mother's voice singing moon hymns, the herbs she used to grow in a tiny garden, learning their healing properties. Kyle listened with an intensity that unsettled her, absorbing every detail like he was trying to understand a foreign language. And in turn, he shared pieces of his own story, the brutal upbringing under an abusive father, the belief that showing mercy was inviting death, the constant fear that drove every cruel decision. None of it excused his actions, but it provided context. Elara began to understand that Kale had been as much a prisoner of the system as anyone, just imprisoned by power instead of powerlessness. He had built his throne on pain, yes, but he had been in pain too, just a different kind. It did not make her forgive him, not yet, but it made him less monstrous, more tragic. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering if he was managing to sleep through the nightmares she felt echoing through the bond, wondering if his hands still shook when he passed the places where he had ordered her beaten. The answer was yes to both, and somehow that mattered. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think about Elara's decision to give Kale a chance. Is redemption truly possible, or is she making a mistake? I love reading your perspectives on these complex relationships. 6 months after the trial, an unexpected development shook the fragile peace. A young Omega, barely 15, came forward with information about the Shadow Rot curse. She had found a journal in the old archives, written by Elara's mother before her disappearance. The journal revealed that the Shadow Rot was not a natural curse at all. It had been engineered by a rival pack's witch decades ago, designed to target alpha wolves who abused their power. The curse lay dormant until the alpha's crimes reached a certain threshold, then activated as cosmic justice. But the journal also revealed something else. Alara's family had not been killed during Kale's purge. They had been investigating this curse and had been silenced by someone within Silvercrest itself, someone who wanted the curse's origins to remain hidden. The revelation turned everything on its head. Kale's shadow rot had not been random divine punishment, but the result of his accumulated cruelty triggering a magical trap. And Alara's family had been murdered not for political reasons, but to cover up someone's involvement with the curse's creation. Someone in the pack was a traitor working with external enemies, and they were still at large. Alara felt her world tilt sideways. Her parents might have been killed specifically because they discovered this plot. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. She immediately assembled the council, including Kale, to investigate. They began tracking down everyone who had access to the archives during the time of her parents' disappearance. The list was small, only a handful of high-ranking wolves, but it included Garrett, Kale's former second-in-command, and the man who had ordered Alara brought forward to heal the Alpha King. Garrett had been quiet since Kale's abdication, serving on the council but rarely speaking. Now, under scrutiny, his behavior seemed suspicious. He opposed every investigation, claiming it was a waste of resources. He tried to redirect attention to external threats, and when Alara's team found evidence of secret communications between him and the Northern Pack, his guilt became undeniable. Garrett had been Victus's agent inside Silvercrest for years, feeding information and working to destabilize Kale's regime from within. He had helped activate the Shadow Rot curse, hoping it would kill Kale and throw the pack into chaos, allowing Victus to sweep in and conquer. But Alara's unexpected ability to heal the curse had ruined those plans. Garrett had been waiting ever since, looking for another opportunity to complete his betrayal, and he had been the one to order the deaths of Alara's parents when they got too close to the truth. The confrontation was brutal. Garrett, when cornered, tried to fight his way out, shifting into his wolf form and lunging for Alara. But Kale was faster. He intercepted Garrett mid-leap, the two wolves crashing together in a snarling mass of fur and teeth. The fight was vicious and short. Kale's wolf, fueled by rage at the betrayal and need to protect his mate, tore Garrett apart with methodical efficiency. By the time Alara could call him off, Garrett was dead, his throat crushed, his blood staining the council chamber floor. Kale shifted back to human form, covered in gore, his eyes wild. He had killed to protect her. The mate bond sang with the rightness of it, even as her mind recoiled from the violence. In the aftermath, evidence poured in. Garrett had been behind numerous incidents blamed on Alara, had fabricated evidence to justify her persecution, all to keep Kale's attention focused elsewhere, while he undermined the pack's stability. He had murdered her family personally, strangling her mother and father in their sleep and disposing of their bodies in the river. Learning the truth was like having a wound reopened. Alara had thought she knew who her enemy was, had focused all her hatred on Kyle. But Kyle, for all his cruelty, had been manipulated too. He had genuine crimes to answer for, yes, but some of the worst accusations had been Garrett's lies. The world was more complicated than she wanted it to be. Kyle found her that night, sitting by the river where her parents' bodies had been thrown. He did not say anything, just sat beside her in silence. After a while she spoke. She told him that she did not know how to feel anymore. Angry at him for the things he actually did. Angry at Garrett for making it worse. Angry at herself for not seeing the truth sooner. Grieving for her parents all over again. And beneath it all, confused by the mate bond that kept pulling her toward the man who had been the face of her suffering, even if he was not the only. Guilty party. Kale's response was quiet and careful. He said that her feelings were valid, all of them, even the contradictory ones. He could not undo the past, could not bring back her parents or erase her scars, but he could give her the truth. Yes, Garrett had manipulated him and fed him false information. But Kale had chosen to believe those lies because they were convenient. He had chosen to use her as a scapegoat because it consolidated his power. He bore responsibility for his choices, regardless of Garrett's machinations. He would not hide behind someone else's evil to excuse his own. She deserved better than that. She deserved the full truth, however ugly. Alara looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something that had not been there before. Humility. True, deep humility that came from facing your worst self and choosing to become something different. He would never be innocent. He would always carry the weight of what he had done. But he was trying, genuinely trying, to be better. And she realized that she wanted to let him. Not because he deserved it, but because she deserved to stop carrying hatred. She deserved to heal. And maybe, just maybe, healing required forgiving the unforgivable. She reached out and took his hand, the first voluntary physical contact they had shared since the day she healed him. The mate bond flared to life, golden and warm, and she felt his shock ripple through the connection. She told him that she was willing to try. Really try. Not just going through courtship motions. She wanted to see if they could build something real from the ashes of all this pain. It would not be easy. She would still have hard days where she could not stand to look at him. But she would try if he would keep trying too. Keep working on himself. Keep earning her trust. Keep proving that redemption was possible. Kale's response was to pull her close, wrapping his arms around her for the first time, and she felt him shaking. Through the bond, she felt his overwhelming gratitude mixed with disbelief, as if he could not quite believe she was giving him this chance. They sat by the river until dawn, holding each other, two broken people trying to figure out how to build something whole. It was not happily ever after. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The seasons turned again, and Silvercrest continued to transform. Ilara's leadership style became a model for other packs, proving that strength could exist without cruelty. Omegas began rising to positions of power, inspired by her example. The healing circles expanded into a network spanning multiple territories. And Kale worked tirelessly at her side, no longer the Alpha King, but something he chose himself. Her mate, her partner, her fiercest protector and most honest critic. They completed the mate bond ritual on the anniversary of his trial, under a full moon with the entire pack as witnesses. The bond settled into place permanently, and Alara felt whole for the first time in years. But their story was not without continued challenges. Some traditionalist alphas still viewed Alara's reforms as weakness and tested their borders regularly. Internal conflicts arose as old power structures were dismantled, and not everyone agreed with the changes. Kyle struggled with guilt that manifested in nightmares and moments of crippling self-doubt. Ilara faced her own demons, days when the scars on her shoulder burned, and she could not separate past from present. They went to couples counseling with the pack healers, worked through triggers and boundaries, and learned to support each other through the hard moments. 3 years after the trial, Alara gave birth to their first child, a daughter with silver fur like her mother and dark eyes like her father. They named her Luna, after the goddess who had guided them both through their darkest moments. Holding that tiny life, Kel wept openly, overwhelmed by the trust Alara had placed in him, to let him be a father after everything he had done, to believe he could be gentle. Alara watched him cradle their daughter with infinite care, and felt the last piece of her anger dissolve. He had earned this. They had earned this. Together, they had walked through fire and emerged transformed. The pack thrived under their joint leadership. Trade agreements with neighboring packs brought prosperity. The healing networks reduced violence across the territories. Young wolves grew up in a system where power meant responsibility rather than domination. And Alara's name, once a symbol of victimhood, became synonymous with resilience and transformative justice. When elders told stories around fires, they spoke of the moon daughter who saved a dying kingdom and rebuilt it from the ground up, who turned her greatest enemy into her greatest ally, and who proved that even the most broken systems could be healed with courage and compassion. Kyle never stopped working to prove himself worthy. Every day, he made the choice to be better than he was yesterday. He established the Moonstone Foundation in honor of Alara's parents, supporting scholars and healers throughout the territories. He taught young alphas that true strength meant protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. And when Luna was old enough to understand, he told her the truth about his past, holding nothing back, because he wanted her to learn that people could change, but that change required accountability and consistent effort. Luna listened gravely and then asked if that meant everyone deserved second chances. Kale glanced at Alara, who smiled softly. Not everyone, they told their daughter, but people who genuinely tried to repair their harm, who took responsibility without making excuses, who worked every day to be better. Maybe those people did. Maybe. On the 10th anniversary of Kale's trial and abdication, the pack held a celebration. Alara stood before her people, no longer the frightened Omega scrubbing floors, but a confident leader who had reshaped their entire world. She spoke about the journey they had all taken together, from a kingdom built on fear to a community built on mutual respect. She acknowledged the pain of the past while celebrating how far they had come, and she thanked Kale publicly, not for being a good Alpha King, because he had not been, but for having the courage to face his failures and become something different, for proving that redemption was a lifelong process, not a single moment. Of forgiveness. Kale stood beside her, older now, silver threading through his dark hair, but stronger in ways that mattered more than physical power. He spoke briefly, simply thanking Alara for saving his life twice, once from the shadow rot, and once from himself. He promised to spend whatever days remained to him serving the pack and honoring the second chance he had been given. The pack cheered, and Alara felt through the mate bond his deep contentment. He was happy, not because he had regained power or absolved himself, but because he had found purpose in service. He had learned what her parents knew all those years ago, that true strength came from lifting others up. That night, under the same moon that had witnessed so much pain and transformation, Alara and Kale walked in the forest together. Luna slept safe at home with her grandmother, and they had a rare moment alone. Kale asked if she ever regretted giving him a chance, considering how hard the journey had been. Alara thought about it honestly. There were moments, she admitted, especially in the early years, when she wanted to walk away, when the pain felt too great and forgiveness too costly. But looking back now, she did not regret it. Their story was messy and imperfect, but it was real. They had both grown in ways that would not have been possible alone, and they had proven that even the deepest wounds could scar over into something bearable, maybe even beautiful in their own way. Kale pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. He told her that he loved her, had loved her from the moment the mate bond snapped into place. Maybe even before, though he had been too broken to recognize it. She was his redemption, his conscience, his greatest teacher. Everything good in his life came from her willingness to see past the monster to the man underneath. Alara smiled and kissed him softly. She loved him too, she said, though it was a complicated love built on years of work rather than instant passion. But complicated did not mean less valuable. Sometimes the hardest loves were the most enduring. They stood in the moonlight, two souls who had taken the longest, hardest path to each other, and knew they would continue choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. The Alpha King had built his throne on her pain, yes, but the kingdom no longer bowed to his name. It bowed to hers. And together, they had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy not of conquest, but of compassion, not of domination, but of healing. The Moon Daughter and her reformed Alpha, forever bound, forever growing, forever proving that transformation was always possible if you had the courage to try. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might need to hear a tale about redemption and second chances. And subscribe to the channel for more stories exploring the complex journeys of love, power, and transformation. Until next time, may you find the courage to face your own shadows and the wisdom to know when healing is possible.